An angry response from Israel after a draft resolution to end its occupation of Palestine was formally submitted to the Security Council. But how far will Palestinians go? And could the ongoing diplomatic pressure on the Israeli Prime Minister help their case? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Martine Dennis. A significant moment in time as Palestine gets a resolution tabled at the UN Security Council to end Israeli occupation by a specific date. Now, whether this resolution will actually be voted on, passed or vetoed remains to be seen. But if nothing else, what appears to be a groundswell of support for Palestinian statehood will certainly be a boost in morale for those fighting for the cause. And as the Palestinian case gathers momentum, Israel appears to be increasingly isolated internationally. On Wednesday night, Jordan submitted the draft resolution to the Security Council on behalf of the Palestinian leadership. What exactly will the Security Council members be considering? Well, Palestine demands Israel's withdrawal from the occupied territories no later than 2017. It calls for a return of lands captured by Israel during the 1967 Six-Day War. The resolution seeks statehood in the West Bank and blockaded Gaza Strip, with East Jerusalem as its capital. 9 votes of 15 are needed for the Security Council to adopt the resolution, with no vetoes from the permanent 5. Well, the United States has gone on record saying that it cannot support a resolution that sets specific deadlines on the process. Well, on Thursday, Israel's Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman expressed hope that the Palestinians would return to the negotiating table and criticised the EU for being one-sided.
I still don't see that this resolution comes to the table. There are some discussions between members of Security Council. We don't know exactly how long it will take, but it's clear that majority of the members of Security Council, they understand that this resolution very, very counterproductive, and in my understanding, they will postpone this vote for time. It's really resolutions one-sided that Palestinians submitted, and I'm not sure that even other Arab states, they're completely supportive to this resolution.
Well, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has suffered increasing diplomatic setbacks as the Palestinian cause gains ground abroad. He's had to call for early elections to be held next March in an effort to bolster support for his Likud party. But he's in a tricky situation. Several European governments have recently expressed their recognition of a Palestinian state. France, Britain and Germany are involved in the drafting of their own resolution to conclude peace talks within 2 years. A European court in Luxembourg, meanwhile, ordered Hamas to be removed from the EU terrorist list. Netanyahu faces growing criticism at home, with increasing worries over economic policies and the collapse of the coalition government in early December. The United States has expressed its opposition to the resolution, but has raised the prospect of wielding its veto, merely saying that it needs further consultations. Right now, let's bring in our guest. Joining us today in Ramallah, Husam Zumlot, Deputy Commissioner for Fatah. In Jerusalem, FatahAlon Liel, former Director General of the Israeli Foreign Ministry. And in London, Chris Doyle, Director of the Council for Arab-British Understanding. Welcome, gentlemen, to the programme. Can I start with you, Husam Zumlot, in Ramallah? This resolution has very little chance, doesn't it, of passing. Even if it gets to the debating stage, it has no chance of passing, pretty much. Is this merely an attempt, really, to flush out the negotiating positions of the various parties on the Security Council and perhaps even tempt the United States reluctantly into a veto?
No, this is a step part of a much bigger comprehensive plan that we have as Palestinians to primarily put ourselves and the Israelis and the international community at a crossroad. Either we travel forward with an international decision to affirm the Palestinian rights, the Palestinian statehood and borders and capital and the right of return, with a very clear timetable for implementation with international monitoring and presence and commitments, or we will reconsider as Palestinians all of our commitments. This is a very serious strategic moment whereby we are saying to the world that we have waited 67 years since our Nakba catastrophe, when we were uprooted from our land and our land was colonized and taken, and 21 years we have waited after the start of the peace process, the Oslo peace process, when we, the Palestinians, initiated that peace process by declaring and announcing the two-state solution and recognizing Israel formally. But in these 21 years, this game was a game of deceit. Israel has used these 21 years only to cover up for its real project, which is the Greater Israel project. Today, we are saying to the rest of the world, we are no longer capable to wait one more week. Therefore, what we are doing is parallel and sequential. The parallel activities we are doing is what you have just reported, whether the recognitions that are sweeping Europe or the meeting about the high contracting parties of the Fourth Geneva Convention about Palestine and the application of international law.
Okay, can I interrupt you there so that we can take a little bit of what you've just said and put it to our other guests? And Alon Liel in Jerusalem, that's a pretty compelling message, isn't it? The Palestinians have simply had enough.
Yes, it looks like they are moving to the diplomatic channels. There was an effort, a Palestinian effort, led by the Hamas in the summer. On the military aspect, we had missiles all over Israel, and now it's diplomatic missiles being launched. And I think that if we could meet the military missiles with our Iron Dome, it seems that if Israel has lost its Iron Dome on the diplomatic level, and the diplomatic missiles are more effective than the military ones, I think it is embarrassing Israel. The European momentum, I think, caught Israel by surprise, starting with Sweden about 3 months ago, moving to the other countries, other parliaments, and now in the United States and with the American dilemmas, it looks like the Palestinians are covering important mileage in their diplomatic efforts.
And Chris Doyle in London, so from what Alon was saying, it sounds as though the Palestinians have pitched their strategy perfectly, capitalising on a wave of sympathy coming off the back, of course, of the Gaza war, which of course upset so many people around the world and actually changed opinions with regard to how they view this conflict. But we're in a period of consultations, as they say in diplomatic speak. What's likely to emerge as a consequence of these negotiations? A watered down, very distilled piece of paper that then could be presented to the Security Council?
Well, there is that possibility. Of course, Palestinians have very few options. We're talking about a state that is being asked to be recognised, that is still under occupation, under blockade, and a people who largely are still in exile. So their options are limited. I think the question really is, what is Israel going to be doing? Because it's been very clear, it's not a surprise and shouldn't have come as a surprise to Israeli leaders that they were losing European public and state support. There were many, many warnings over the last couple of years about the settlement projects, the way that they were being expanded. The British ambassador, for example, was very, very clear that Israel was losing friends. That's been his message now for some time. But there was this belief in Tel Aviv that somehow they had a Teflon status, that this wouldn't change, that the Europeans could be taken for granted. But they're not just losing ground in Europe, they are also losing ground in the United States. The United States has not committed itself to a veto at the Security Council. Now that in itself is a change, because for some time now, the United States, it was a guaranteed veto at the Security Council on any resolution. So, yes, there is a possibility that a resolution could potentially be watered down. But Husam Zumlot said it, that there is a limit to Palestinian patience. The Oslo process started back in 1993, and they have seen precious little for all of those negotiations. So, are we going to move into a different framework now, where perhaps the United States is no longer the sole power that moderates the talks between both sides? Perhaps we need a different structure in which to try to bring about the end of this crisis. Because
that's a very interesting thought, Chris. Can I ask you to pause there? And Alon, you've already pointed to the fact that Israel is rather embarrassed by this turn of events, by this change of attitude towards it. But Israel has its own domestic problems. Certainly, the government of Prime Minister Netanyahu, currently in caretaker phase, called for early elections for March for next year. It seems very much as though the political terrain in Israel is in itself in crisis, and therefore is it able to respond to this situation in any constructive way?
No, I don't think elections are crisis. We have elections in 3 months, and elections are also raising some hopes here. Everything is open. The right wing is still stronger than the left wing, but the chances of Netanyahu to stay prime minister are definitely less than 50%. I would say even less than 30–40%. So things can change in Israel, obviously, but it's very difficult to analyze what will happen after the elections. I think we have at the moment 5 or 6 Israeli personalities, Israeli politicians that have a chance to be the Israeli prime minister in about 3 months. So very difficult to predict. But I think we have enough material to work with this recent momentum of 3 months. The European momentum is serious, but it did not exhaust itself. There are still about 15 European parliaments that still can take a vote on Palestine, and then it has to spill over to the governments, because so far in the last wave it is only Sweden that did it as a government. And what is especially painful to Israel is when governments do it. So after this wave of parliaments, it has to spill over to the governmental level. Another thing is Germany. The big question here is if the German parliament will join this European momentum, because if it will be an earthquake here. So I think at this moment, the United States is a little bit less important than it used to be. Europe took the lead, took a more moral standing, and a united European position, a European consensus can embarrass Washington in the very near future.
But it already looks likely, as you've mentioned, that no matter the fractured political landscape in Israel, that Netanyahu looks likely to be the eventual winner. Is he somebody who can actually negotiate if the Americans stay as the caretaker of the peace process? Can he negotiate, given that he's upset the White House beyond repair, many would say?
First of all, it's not sure at all that Netanyahu will stay prime minister. And look at our polls. Things are very open. And the question is not the personality that will be the prime minister. The question is the coalition. Who will be the coalition partners? With the existing coalition, there was no chance at all to reach an agreement with the Palestinians. And more so, there was no chance at all even to renew the talks. And I think this is the reason Europe jumped in, because everybody in Europe understood that with this Prime Minister Netanyahu and with this existing coalition, nothing will happen. But to analyze after the elections, I wouldn't start even guessing. If we will have a center coalition or center-left coalition, it's a different ballgame than a right-wing or even a center-right coalition.
OK, Husam Zumlot in Ramallah. So it seems very much as though the Palestinians have played their cards very well up until this point. But nonetheless, questions are still asked about the leadership of Mr. Abbas. Some are saying that he's a spent force and that he's not really capable of leading you on to the next phase.
Who said that? It might be Israel now saying that, repeating what they did to Yasser Arafat.
I could quote a leading Palestinian-American journalist.
I heard you. And I tell you, it's Israel now, the Israeli establishment, the Israeli Shin Bet, that is engaged in trying to attack Mahmoud Abbas personally, the president, to weaken him in this leveraging and in this engagement in the diplomatic arena. President Abbas was the one who started this whole campaign in September this year at the General Assembly podium, when he declared to the world in his speech two things. The first, he said, now is the moment of Palestinian independence. Now is the moment of the end of Israel's occupation. The second thing he said, this road we traveled for the last 21 years, we are no longer willing and will not travel it again, period. The world and us here in Palestine picked the signal, and that's why Sweden recognized only few weeks after that speech. We started this campaign. President Abbas started this campaign. We are in the initiative side. We are in the action side of the story, and the UN is not the only place we are acting, and the Security Council is not the only arena we are acting. Regardless of internal Palestinian discussion, today there is a serious Israeli pressure to attack the president personally. I caution against it. This is a historic figure of the national movement, regardless of democratic processes that we call for, that he himself, President Abbas, ensured under occupation in 2006 and insisted that Hamas run under such situations. But today we clinch and we support him at a time when we are, yes, as your Israeli guest just said, this is a diplomatic war. This is a very serious war. So we will not allow anybody to deviate into personal discussions and individual discussions about President Abbas. Yet, I'll tell you one thing. Today, we have really prepared our campaign. And we know exactly where is our strength and where is our weakness. For the last 21 years, we have been taken to the arena of our weakness. From the limbo, the legal and political limbo that Oslo placed us in, we don't know if we are under occupation, not under occupation, emerging from occupation, we have an authority, we don't have an authority. What are the contours of the solution? To the 100% control Israel has during these 21 years and zero responsibility. We, the Palestinians, were footing the bill, to being totally and utterly focused on the process, lasting process rather than a real peace, and disconnecting the process from the outcome, that is a Palestinian state, i.e. the settlements. And lastly, putting us in the bilateral arena where our strength is the international arena. Today, we are correcting all that. Today we are calling the bluff of Mr. Netanyahu and the Israeli government, because, you know, you're asking the question, Israel is panicking because of our movement. Why should Israel panic? Why should Israel be angry if we are just affirming the two-state solution that the successive Israeli governments have declared publicly, including Netanyahu, to be supporting?
Okay,
because they are
indeed.
supporting
Thank
that.
Thank you, Mr. Zumlot. Can I go to you, Chris Doyle, in London, and ask you about Arab support? We've heard a little bit about how European governments are sympathising much more openly with the Palestinian cause. What about Arab governments, many of them of whom, of course, are consumed with their own internal crises, not least dealing with ISIL and other forms of instability? How far are they distracted from the issue of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict?
Well, the Arab governments still certainly support a solution to the Israel-Palestine conflict. They still support the Palestinians. But as you say, you look around the region, and the region is in crisis in every single direction, whether it be in Syria, Iraq, or to Libya, or Yemen in the south. So certainly, Palestine perhaps is not as high up on the agenda, but it still matters. It's still very, very important. And we saw the reaction across the Arab world to the whole Gaza conflict in the summer. So there is a great deal of public support for Palestinians. But there is also tiredness and fatigue with all this, and that comes back to this whole issue of getting to a point of saying we should set some sort of deadline for bringing the occupation to an end, to bring this dreadful conflict to an end after so many decades. And going back to the issue of Europe, because I think this must be emphasized, the European Union has invested heavily in a two-state solution. And it has done so since 1980 and then through the Oslo years, costing hundreds of millions in aid. And what they have been warning is that with the huge settlement program that successive Israeli governments have undertaken, now with 550,000 plus settlers in the West Bank, that they cannot see where this second state is coming from unless serious action is taken now. So their patience has run out. They do not want to see that solution they've invested be eroded away, nor, after this summer, do they want to have to invest once again in rebuilding Gaza. So their patience with the whole Israeli approach is simply vanishing. And I think you will see further votes, you will see further resolutions in Parliament, unless the Israeli government actually starts changing its position. And indeed, why does it object to a Palestinian state? Why does it object to these moves? It should embrace them, as indeed a former Labour Likud minister, Dan Meridor, has actually said in an interview only in the last 24 hours. Why does Netanyahu object to these moves?
And Alon Liel in Jerusalem, with around about 80% of the global population, I'm talking about 135 plus members of the UN in support of the Palestinian cause, how is that going to be reckoned with in modern Israel?
Oh, if you speak on the assembly, it's very clear that once this question of Palestine or full membership or Palestine becoming a member state in the UN, if it reaches the assembly, it's very clear that it will have a huge majority. The Security Council can block it from reaching the assembly. And if there is an American veto, this question is just fading away. So this is a critical moment, and it's a big difference if the vote will be in December or in January, because the structure of the Security Council is different. The 5 new members from the 1st of January are more pro-Palestinian than the 5 that are leaving. So I think from the Palestinian side to have the vote now might be a mistake, and I think they are clever enough to understand that they should have the vote in January. If in January it will be 9 members supporting and the United States faces the dilemma veto or not, the European position is of critical importance, because if Europe will tell the United States you are quarreling not only with Israel, if you avoid a veto, you are quarreling with us, it's a rift in the Western camp, then the United States will hesitate. And if there will be no American veto, it is an unbelievable situation. The Israeli public will have to think what's happening. The new government will have to think what's happening. If there is a veto, it stays Europe against Israel.
Okay. And Husam Zumlot in Ramallah. So then it seems everything is working in your favour at the moment. You have to be prepared, I presume, then, to make sure that your unity government is strong and stays united, because this is the area, of course, that has attracted a lot of concern in the past, and that is the solidity of the collusion between Fatah and Hamas.
No, not everything is working with us. Outside, everything is working with us. But inside, on the ground, no. Things are very bad. Things are very serious. The Israeli government is very fast in implementing their plan. The colonization is at rocketing level. The Judaization of Jerusalem, the siege on Gaza. So things on the ground, that's exactly why we're doing what we are doing. And yes, you're absolutely right. Our unity is vital. And without our ability to resist this occupation on the ground, popularly, peacefully, and to raise its cost, our international actions and activism will not do on its own. And I agree with you, and that's why we do have a national consensus government. And despite Netanyahu's political coup d'etat against this government, just when we announced it, asking the world not to recognize it, and he failed, and his military coup d'etat declaring war on Gaza to topple the government, and he failed, and we still have a consensus government. Yes, we should continue and keep this government, and yes, we should continue and reach out for each other and solidify our internal home.
Husam Zumlot.
But I have one last...
I have to jump in there. I'm really sorry.
I have one last sentence. One last sentence.
Can you do it in 5 seconds?
I want to warn you. I want to warn you from focusing on the person of the president, because this is an Israeli trick to focus on him when he is engaged in a war of diplomacy
Husam
against
Zumlot,
them.
thank you very much in Ramallah. Chris Doyle in London, thank you very much. And FatahAlon Liel, thank you very much indeed, all of you gentlemen, for joining us on Inside Story. And thank you, of course, for watching. And a reminder that you can always find this show and the rest of our programmes on the website, aljazeera.com. You can post your comments at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or there's always Twitter, of course, at AJ Inside Story. I'm Martine Dennis. Thank you for watching, and bye for now.